Welcome back from the break. In case you're just joining us, my name is Dan Devane, and I'm a principal technical specialist focusing on open source databases. So in previous session, we talked about migrating MySQL workloads to Azure. In this session specific, we're going to look at the PostgreSQL offering and then drill down on what it takes to migrate a PostgreSQL workload from an on-premises or a virtual machine hosted environment and bring that over to Azure, taking advantage of the PostgreSQL PaaS offerings that we have on the platform. The Azure database for PostgreSQL offering offers a PaaS service, just like what we previously discussed around the MySQL offering on Azure. Now, we mentioned the variety of open source database technologies. Again, want to reinforce that you could deploy your own virtual machine, but you're not really taking the full advantage of the capabilities that you have for the PaaS service and taking advantage of the Azure capabilities that come with that. We refer to these as the capabilities to do local or geo-redundant storage and build your database solutions at scale on top of that, taking advantage of the industry-leading security efforts and compliance features such as advanced threat protection. And because of the strong integration of Azure DB for PostgreSQL with the Azure ecosystem, you can build applications faster and build innovative solutions that you could safeguard using the Azure IP advantage, really building out a intelligent performance at-scale solution, leveraging your strength and knowledge you already had with PostgreSQL. So as we look at these migration benefits, high availability and scale to elastically scale out the performance of the PostgreSQL offering is unique and managed in the open source database markets on Azure, giving you high availability SSLA of 99.99% over all the pricing tiers and offerings that we do have on the platform. The unique architecture allows you to scale your database, your server in seconds with little or no downtime for your application. So you don't have to go over provision a database server to handle peak loads, which often happen that might be seasonal or based on the way you organize your business. So we're leveraging the same technology that powers high availability of Azure Data Services for scale, for performance, and it's as simple as literally changing a slider to increase or decrease the number of CPU cores or V cores you want to assign to this. The scaling effectively brings up a new server at the new performance tier, switches over to the storage on the previous server, and we then also remap DNS in about 15 to 20 seconds. So you don't have to worry about even sizing the servers that comes into need. You can actually start and build on top of that as you go, or if you have growing needs within your infrastructure. Now, we talked about security and compliance, and of course, the various industry verticals such as SOC compliance, ISO, HIPAA requirements, PSI, and DSS are certainly one of the standards that are fully supported by the platform. So we're really good on that side. Also, of course, when we think about things like built-in encryption for data at rest and backup at rest, you have really full control over securing your platform, securing an environment with firewall rules, VNet support, as well as secure SSL. Then when we think about this from an authentication perspective, you have native authentication or Active Directory integration, Azure Active AD integration that you can support with that as well. As we think about this from a backup restore capability, the Azure database for PostgreSQL, just like the other PaaS services, automatically create backup of your environment, store them in locally redundant or geo-redundant storage based on how you configure the environment, and then you have the ability to do a restore in time. That also means that from a monitoring of your servers and management, you have full capabilities on the Azure platform by being able to use the Azure monitoring capabilities and get insights into every metric that you might define as part of your advanced monitoring or alerting. And this metric frequency could be determined, and you could also set the amount of history that would have to go with configuring these alerts or configuring these Azure metrics. We also mentioned the query performance insights will help you to identify what your longest running queries are. We've got some examples in that coming later in the session as well. And then the ability to really use the advanced threat detection, allowing you to detect anomalies in your data or anomalies in the access to your data is actually one of the core features why customers decide to choose a PaaS Azure-based platform to build their secure applications and their secure environments on. From an integration perspective, support of the variety of program languages, really integrated within Azure DevOps and building applications that really are at a global scale to take advantage of other services like containerized services, machine learning, logic apps, using Azure functions, or being able to ingest data using Azure Data Factory, for example, are one of the core opportunities you have in order for you to provide stronger integration, including data visualization capabilities with Power BI and other techniques to start visualizing the data. And of course, one of the things we'll be focusing on specifically is what it's going to take us to actually perform that database migration from the on-premises or already hosted environment and bring that over to Azure. Now, one of the unique features that we have with the PostgreSQL offering is the ability to scale out horizontally. Okay, so we're building this Azure database for PostgreSQL as a relational database service in Azure, built for developers, and we're using the open source community version of open source PostgreSQL database engine, but we enhance this with hyperscale. It's a deployment option that gives you horizontal scale of your queries across multiple machines. So there's a sharding technique that actually being used in order to provide you massive parallel processing where your query engine will parallelize the incoming SQL queries across these servers, which gives you faster response on much larger data sets. It serves your applications that require this greater scale and require this greater performance, or workloads that are either approaching over 100 gigabytes of data, really giving you that horizontal scale with parallel query execution, and also giving you excellent support for multi-tenant applications, which you probably might be running real-time operational analytics on, or you might have a need for some really advanced or high throughput transactional workloads. The applications you build could run distributed queries on the hyperscale platform by just using the standard PostgreSQL connection libraries and might need minimal changes to your environment in order for you to implement that. And as we're continuing to adding open source extensions onto the platform, you really could bring all the goodness and the majority of the goodness that you've done with PostgreSQL already, move that over to the PaaS service on Azure. Now, in previous session, we did talk about the migration steps, and one of the things that we brought up was the database migration guide, giving you some insights on how to perform a migration and what are the steps associated with such migration. And what I want to do just real quick is actually pull up the migration guide here. Okay, so I have the Azure Database Migration Guide. It's very easy URL, datamigration.microsoft.com, and you can select what's going to be your source. You see, this is a very comprehensive set of items that you can look at. If I want to perform a migration from PostgreSQL and migrate to Azure Database for PostgreSQL, or I want to go to this migration from MySQL to Azure Database for MySQL, or to SQL servers, you see there's a variety of offerings, right? I have the option to also migrate an Oracle workload to Azure Database for PostgreSQL and give you some very descriptive insights on how you would go about that migration. So let's have a click here on the Azure Database for PostgreSQL, where it's now going to load that scenario and talk about these before and after steps. What are you going to do before you start is understand on what are the PostgreSQL versions that are supported. Know that you can also perform a migration from AWS RDS and move that workload over to Azure. You'll go over the pre-migration steps how the actual migration takes place. We'll have a look at that in detail as part of these sessions, and then also the post-migration tasks and application, performance testing, remediation that you might have to go through. So this is really comprehensive, great instrument that talks about partner tooling and capabilities that we have around that as well. Certainly something I would like you to have a look at. So we did previously also talk about these very important migration phases. It's like, what do I need to go do first? First of all, most important thing is really discover what are your database assets. And there's a variety of tools that allow you to do that kind of network research and identify what servers you have running. You can then start assessing that workload. But in pretty much every migration project, you want to do an initial conversion of the source schema and then map that and see if that schema works to the target database. A very common step is first to start fixing things that might provide some form of incompatibility on the source schema prior to putting that into a target and going to the middle stage, which is the actual migration stage. Now, in that migration stage, the application workload could actually be the determining factor on whether or not you want to do a live migration or whether you want to perform an offline migration. Offline migrations are certainly the easiest to perform, but one of the challenges you might have there is how you're going to be keeping your data in sync. So therefore, maybe a live migration might be the best of choice in order to first move the schema, move the database objects and everything associated with it, perform a data sync by using forms of replication or other capabilities such as using Azure Data Factory to keep data in sync, and then you're going to be performing that initial cutover. Now, not uncommon is this post-migration phase is you have to do some application remediation, might have to change some connection strings, but you closely want to monitor some of these post-migration or even database scenarios you have around upgrades to say like, hey, I want to go to some additional optimization. And so we have some tooling on that to identify what are my worst performing queries, what are some of the other considerations in terms of high availability, very common as part of this migration step. Now, what does that mean with regards to a PostgreSQL migration over to Azure? It actually means that before you're going to be jumping in, doing that actual migration is let's go ahead again and provision that Azure destination, spin up the servers, spin up the database, which of course could be done by using the Azure portal or interface, or you have the capability to perform that using Azure CLI, which could be Bash. You could be using PowerShell to accomplish that as well, or there might be Azure Resource Manager deployment that you would actually take to do this. So in this migration workflow, configuring your existing environment, exporting the schema, provisioning your Azure destination is a very common scenario you've also seen with the MySQL deployment. And then you're performing the actual migration could be done on export, import, dump and restore, or you could be creating a migration project. We've seen in the previous demo, and we'll reiterate and review this in this module as well, to create a migration project, run the migration activity, and then also cut over to the new database prior to running that optimization. Now, when we think about provisioning the PostgreSQL servers, again, it's important to understand what are my usage scenarios and what are my usage capabilities. And so I have the ability to deploy a single server, or I have the possibility to also deploy a hyperscale server that really gives you that massive deployment of a cluster, spinning up the underlying architectures that allows you to do sharding. One of the things that we also did is just like we had with MySQL, and it's not referenced on this slide, but you'll see it as I go over to the demo around provisioning. You also now have the capability in preview that allows you to do flexible server on PostgreSQL, and you also have the possibility to do a deployment of a PostgreSQL workload on Azure Arc. So we'll have a look at that, and let's switch over to the demo for that. So as we're looking into the Azure portal, I have my Azure databases for PostgreSQL. I can get there through the blade on the side here, or I can actually go look for that resource. And so what I will be doing first is I'm going to be creating and deploying a single server. So we'll specify this again and go through a very similar setting like we've done with the MySQL deployment. And so I'm going to be picking a resource group here, or selecting a resource group. And the resource group that we're going to be picking here is the Virtual Training Day Azure SQL. Okay, you did see a whole lot of resource groups in the list. This is actually one of the accounts that we're using to do our content creation. So I'm showing you some examples around that as well. It's asking me for a server name. I'm going to stay consistent with my server name, and we'll be saying I like PostgreSQL. Okay, is my server name. It's unique. It's available. Since I now configure a PostgreSQL server, I can actually also pick the version. Currently, the highest version supported is a version 11. Same configuration around storage and sizes. If I click on the configuration there, again, I could go with basic, general purpose, memory optimized, or I also have then here at the bottom the capability to specify locally redundant storage versus sheer redundancy. Okay, so just click OK on this one. We're going to keep the defaults. I will specify my SQL admin user here and give that a password. Hopefully I did type that right. Looks like I didn't, so let's just quickly again. Okay, and there we go. We'll head over to the additional settings. Data encryption is just exactly the same as what you've seen in the previous demo. The tagging is exactly the same. I could say that, hey, this is going to be a key tag or a field, and then specify these resources. I'll just skip this for now. Again, we'll review and recreate, and I can download the template or just hit create here and spin up that server. Now, while this is provisioning, a lot of times we get the question like, I would love to go do and experience this myself. And I just want to switch over there to one of the other screens in my browser here and point you out to the resources that we made you available as part of the Learn platform. So you've been attending this virtual training day, and I hope your day has been really great and enjoyable. You probably want to go find out what some of these additional resources are. And so what my team has built is these Microsoft open source database learning path. This is currently a preview that you're seeing. I'm pretty sure that if you look for this learning path, migrate open source databases to Azure, that this is fully released and accessible to you. And so you see that this is actually broken down into a set of modules. A lot of the content that we already had here in the virtual training day session is actually covered in detail. So you can always go back and then check your knowledge with a knowledge check at the end of these modules. Okay. But what I wanted to point you out is, what if you want to perform this migration and get hands-on on this? Let me show you one of the coolest things that we did with this Learn platform. I can go to the learning path here called Migrate On-Premises PostgreSQL Databases to Azure Database or PostgreSQL. Okay, it's a module. It gives me the learning objectives of the module, an introduction of the offering, how to migrate, how to perform an application migration. But even more exciting, exercises. And for these exercises, you could, sure, of course, go trial this and spin up an Azure trial account or use this in your existing Azure account. What we're doing with these exercises is we're actually using a pre-configured sandboxed environment. And as a user, you have a number of sandboxed environments that you could provision through the day. And look at this, the learning that you're getting here is actually directly embedded into the hands-on experience is actually embedded directly into the content. So what you'll see here is I have this setup environment, and this is a pretty lengthy script using Azure CLI commands in Cloud Shell. And so it actually will provision you an existing environment that has PostgreSQL installed, and as you continue to go through this exercise, you'll do just exactly what I showed you in the portal, spinning up an Azure database for PostgreSQL, and then creating a database using bash script, set the database properties and validate the properties are script figures, export a schema from the source, connect to the PostgreSQL environment, and then actually start performing the migration. I'm just going to kick this off here, and just for the purpose of showing you that, hey, this script will just be executing. So we're just going to paste it as plain text, okay? And you'll see that this environment and virtual machine will be provisioned, okay? In this case, says like, okay, obviously I must have run the script previously. It says that the VNet already exists. But this script will just execute. And I really encourage you at the end of these virtual training days and for the future to come, go explore these assets that you do have available for you on the Learn platform. Now, switching back to my environment here, you see that the deployment is complete. I can now go to the resource and I can look at that resource utilization. One of the things that you see here is I have the administrative username, I have a server name, so I would then be able to just connect using my client tools, providing that connection string. Other properties that you could go set to say, like, what about connection security? But even from an application perspective, you actually see here that you have everything you need to connect to this environment. You can then also go look at some potential server parameters that you might want to go set and modify. And these are actually very close to the server environment settings that you're used to when you are configuring a PostgreSQL server, right? Going back to some of these properties, again, great to review. Other things that you can then go discover is enable this advanced threat protection, look at the query performance insights, start doing the alerts and so on. But prior to us actually looking at that, how about we move on with the session and go back to some of these migration steps and how we go about some of that tooling to perform the actual migration. So let's switch back to the presentation right now. Okay, so we've done our provisioning. Now let's go talk about the migration tools. And so in previous session, we did mention that Azure Migrate will provide you that central hub. You have the ability there to do all these migrations, whether this is the Linux operating system migration, move that over to Azure, or that's a Windows Server migration. Azure Migrate and that consolidated hub is really your way to go. Same thing to go run this assessment on your environment and how you're going to be performing a migration as part of the portal. There's some really great tutorials and demos that you could go explore as part of Azure Migrate as well to really perform these migrations. In order to be respectful of your time and actually refer you back to the previous sessions, I'm not going to go into detail of every single item here. We covered the Azure Migrate in a bit more detail in the previous session, so I would love to refer you reference that one as we move forward. Now, the database migration service, again, we use this to migrate SQL, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MongoDB, Oracle from on-premises over to the cloud. It allows you to do the data, the schema, and the objects. One of the things that I do want to point out is when you're thinking about data migration, really think about how you optimize the source data prior to doing a migration. So take things into considerations around whether you just want to have a schema or you separately want to migrate the data over, and then really use that approach on how to export, how to import. Yes, we could go drive this using data migration service, and we'll walk through that in the demo. But also, let's go discover some of the other migration strategies that we have by, for example, using export and import. So when you're using pgdump to export, one of the things you have to specify is what's going to be the parameter. Do you just want to export schema? So you're going to specify that -s parameter, or do you also want to export the data and then specify the -a parameters What it actually does with PG dump, as you've been using this tool for quite some time, hopefully, right, during the migration session. So my assumption would be that you have PostgreSQL understanding and knowledge. So you would then just generate that into a .SQL file, and it will really bring all that data back. Now, some recommendations and some things that are really important is disable triggers, right? You're actually optimizing your migration performance when you're disabling triggers. Also, load the data separately from the schema is actually one of the best practices that you're going to have to do with data migration service, because if you want to go use data migration service as part of a live migration, what it will actually do is it will first migrate a schema prior to starting the synchronizing